the tax, like in Austin, I use Realist Tax, but
Oh,
every single MLS has its own taxing, thing where you can pull that up.
okay.
And the other handy thing you'll get from there is the actual legal description of the property. Now, it's not going to be the full-blown legal that you're going to get from the deed,
Okay.
but it'll have enough to like section 2 there, where you have there'll be lot 1, block 2, the Woodlands section 3, phase 2 or something like that. And
Got it.
a typical thing, it may not have a lot and block, which is okay. Sometimes it has, it might be like 0.25 acres out of 30 acres of the such and such survey or whatever. And so
Okay.
you would just put NA for lot and block, and you would just fill in as much detail as you could behind it after that comma after block.
Okay. And usually I see this, like some of this information on the lot and block on the MLS, but you said this would also be
You always,
accurate from the
always want
tax
to pull
record?
from the tax. That's right. You always
Okay.
want to pull from the official source. Right.
Okay.
That's all this stuff.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
known as, and sometimes that's where you're going to put the address right there. Oh, this
Yeah.
123 Main Street. If you're buying, sometimes, well, it's more on unimproved property contracts, but sometimes they won't even have an address. It'll just be like, 000 County Road 123, in Bertram, Texas, or whatever.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. That makes sense. Let's see. Exclusions, would that be like personal property that they're excluding?
And this is typically where the seller is going to put something here, right? So
Okay.
you understand, your buyer understands that just above that, it tells you, it describes what comes with the property. It has
Mm-hmm.
improvements, right? Built-in items and this kind of stuff. And, this is, a lot of people argue over this stuff, but if you read it, it says in there, any all equipment, screens, awnings, wall-to-wall carpeting, mirrors, ceiling fans, attics, television antennas, wall mounts, where it talks about mounts and brackets for televisions and speakers. Some people
Okay.
take their TV mounts and they're supposed to leave them up. And so that is actually supposed to be excluded here if they don't, if they take them, right?
Okay.
Chandeliers used to be another controversial thing, but big of a deal anymore. Um,
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. And so here, so this is going to be the down payment, right?
right. Yep.
This is going to be the financed amount
Right.
and then total.
And the total. And sometimes if we're using a different, like different software, some people use zip forms.
Mhm.
A lot of these blanks, like you're typing right into them, sometimes they have to hit the they hit the space bar, and then it allows you to type whatever you want. It's kind of
Gotcha.
hack on using that stuff. But here, also, you want to describe what type of financing. Usually, most cases, you're going to be a third-party financing addendum.
Mm-hmm.
That's a
Mm-hmm.
separate form that we'll discuss.
Yeah, I attached one to the bottom of this too, just because I figured that was kind of the standard.
Make sure you check that box, though.
Okay, gotcha.
So license holder disclosure is pretty straightforward. If you own any piece of it, and it's just cleaner to just, because it's here, I think it says 10%. I mean, that's where I put it, just out there for sure. Even if I'm a very very minor stakeholder.
Okay, so this is like, yeah, if you own any part of it, or if this is your home that you're listing for yourself, you're gonna put that here.
Right.
Okay, gotcha. That makes sense. Okay, so yeah, earnest money, typical, from what I understand, you tell me, maybe like 10% of the sales price?
No, 10's a little high. And
Okay,
actually, it's usually, again, this is a negotiated item. There's no
of
standard
course. Yep.
contract, but typically it's around 1%.
Oh, 1%. Okay, yep, that's definitely what I
Of the
meant.
typically. Now, sometimes if you get into, this can be like a strategy thing, give you a leg up if you're in a multiple offer situation,
Mhm.
and you'll have, you want to stand out. You might put more money here and give yourself a really tight option period, which we'll get into that in a minute. But
Mhm.
that helps your offer stand out a little more. Like, look, they're willing to risk a lot more money here for this
Gotcha.
deal, right?
Okay.
And so that you must deliver, and it's important too. There it says within 3 days after the effective date.
Yeah.
If you don't do it within the 3 days, as you read further down here, it basically allows the seller to have an out. They can get rid of you.
And they can keep your earnest money then.
Well, no, you hadn't delivered it.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Okay, so yeah, you have to deliver it within 3 days, though, but the buyer has to deliver it within 3 days. And then is it the title company that like signs at the bottom that says that they received it?
That's right. There's a receipt page on the very back of the
Okay.
whole thing. We'll get to that towards the end there, but it must deliver the, typically around 1% or so as earnest money to, and that would be, Frank Smith, Susie Smith, whoever's your escrow officer, that would be their name, and then it's at, and then I usually put the name / address in the next line. It says address, but I usually put, if I'm using, I don't know, 123 Title Company at, then I would put their address right behind it.
Okay.
Maybe the hyphen or whatever. You try to cram it all in there if you can. Now the second part is a little more rare. You're not going to, where it says buyer shall deliver additional earnest money of, and then that's where you might have some more money. This might be because there's some other, I don't know, there's something else in the contract that triggers this. It's so rare. We don't really have to even go into it, but normally here you have NA. You put nothing here, or to escrow agent with, again, NA. You never want to leave anything blank.
Okay.
Right.
So, okay, yeah, so it's super rare, but that might, so I guess that multiple offer situation that you were talking about earlier, would that be something that you would deliver additional earnest money, or you would just
No, it's more like, let's say if you had, somebody was making some kind of improvement to a property or something, or y'all have worked out something, and after they're done, you're going to give them more money. That's the only time I've ever really used it.
Okay.
They want to make sure you're like, they were adding a patio or something in the back, or maybe they did a re-roof the house, or they did something that wasn't necessarily they wanted to do, and they want to show your commitment to this deal, right? And so after, they're going to, after 10 days, whenever they, estimated their completion, you're going to put up more money, is an example of that. I can't think of any other it's just so rare that you need it. But both of those blanks you would put NA. So to escrow agent within another NA case, right? Unless you're going to use it.
Perfect.
And then title policy and survey, it's not uncommon. Like, again, that is a negotiated item, but it's not, more common than not that the seller pays for it. And it's often that the seller chooses it also where it goes, which title company. But again, everything's negotiable. These two lines typically match. So when it says issued by, it's usually the same title company that you wrote up, in the name / address of that company, same title company. All you need is the name there. So that'd be, 123 Title, or whatever your favorite title company is.
Okay.
What else? A lot of this stuff you can read here. And so these shortages, it does come up once in a while. Most of the time you have like a lot and block, like I said, like tract homes. This really isn't an issue. But basically what you want to, it depends on what side of this equation you're on. On the buy side, you want to amend it, and you want it to be an expense of the seller.
Okay. So this is also negotiable.
But it's negotiable. If I'm on the other side of this, I probably want it to read, and I want it to be a buyer's expense. Right?
Okay, but on both sides, you usually check that.
I usually do check the box for it to be the shortages in the area. I mean, like this, you're talking about. This is all talking about the all of these items. It says, if you look at all these things above it, this is talking about the actual, the title policy. So like, go up a little bit more. Look, see here, it says in the title policy, subject to promulgated exclusions, including existing building ordinances and the following exceptions. So these are all exceptions to this title policy. That right? And so it's whether or not you want to include or disclude any shortages or whatever.
Gotcha. Okay. Survey.
The survey, and so a survey, if you get a loan, a survey is required. If you have a any normal, like a residential house, sometimes you'll see these condos that look like houses. They don't require surveys. That's still common area. It's considered, I forget the term for it, but you're not necessarily going to use a survey on. You really should put those on condo contracts, and that's a whole nother thing, I guess. But
yeah.
So basically, if you got a loan on the property, you're going to have a survey. If they already have a survey, most good listing agents put it up on the MLS. They'll have it as an attachment. In addition to having a T47, you see there that form. All that form should say is whether or not there were any changes to that survey.
Okay.
Right? I mean, it's got a bunch of other crap in it, but basically what it's saying is, no, we didn't make any changes to the survey, which makes sure, and they have that notarized and signed off on, which makes that acceptable typically to your lender as a usable survey and to the title company.
Gotcha.
So you have three options here of what we can do. So if you have that original survey, they already have a copy of it. Here is where we're telling them, okay, well, they have so many days to give it. They're saying they have a survey. They have the first option, first box says they have so many days to give it to us. And then it tells you the consequences. So it says they have to give us that and a T47. But if a seller fails to furnish the existing survey or affidavit within the prescribed time, which is referring to those however many days we put in there, buyer shall obtain a new survey at seller's expense no later than 3 days prior to closing.
Okay.
Now, that means they told us they had one, they didn't show up with it, they're responsible for buying another one.
Okay.
Right? Now, let's say they gave it to us, and I'm still on the first box here. It says, if the existing survey or affidavit is not acceptable to the title company or the buyer's lender, buyer shall obtain a new survey at, and this is a negotiated item, right? Who's paying for it? Buyer seller's expense. So basically, they gave you a survey and a T47, and in the T47 it said we added a pool, and that's not on that survey.
Okay.
And your lender might say, nope, we need to go we need another survey. So then that would be who's paying for it. And at the time of this recording, a survey on like a lot and block home, they're getting up there now. I think they're around $600 bucks.
Oh, wow.
So
one is that they already have the survey.
That's right. They're saying they already have one. And then the other two is either they may have one and you just don't like it, or you just want to serve it, we just want to get a new survey on the property.
Okay.
Right? Or maybe they don't have one at all. This just tells you who's buying it.
Okay. If anybody wants the new one, then it's like number 2 is going to be it's at the buyer's expense. Number 3 is it's at the seller's expense.
That's right. And usually your survey, so these time frame, or at least whenever you're going to have to pay for a survey, usually want that, depending on how tight your close is, usually want them. You don't want to pay for it until you're through your option period, right? You want to be done negotiating your inspection items to make sure you want the house. I mean, most of the deals that fall apart in the option period.
Right.
Right, which is your inspections and all your due diligence on the house. So you want to make sure that you're not buying a survey. It's not going to say 3 days here unless you had a 3-day option period.
Okay.
Normally, a normal option period, they range, again, we'll get into that in more detail, but at least a week. 5 to 7 days is pretty typical. And so you want to have this probably say 7 or 10 days or something, somewhere
after the option period.
After the option is the kicker. That's the main thing, the main takeaway here, because you don't want to be paying for something, especially if it's going to be on your buyer to buy it. If it's on the seller to buy it, doesn't really matter.
Okay.
They should have one. They're going to need one anyways. But on the buy side, you want to make sure that you're not buying it too soon.
Mm-hmm. And you're not
Objections.
Okay.
This next little section here says buyer may object in writing to defects, exceptions, encumbrances to title disclosed on a survey, other than items, names of stuff from above, and from the commitment that prohibit some following use of the property. Now, normally on a regular home, this is just going to say residential use, but you may specifically want to do home daycare, or you want to run some business or something. This is where you'd want to put that there. You want to make sure you can do what you want to do. This is where you would put that out.
Okay.
And your objection is usually about 7 days after you receive the commitment or exception documents and survey.
Okay. And if somebody did want to run a business, it would have to be zoned to be able to run a business?
It would. I mean, but you have some, not necessarily zone, but you may have some county property. Like I live in the county. I live out where I can pretty much do what I want to do at my house.
Okay.
Right. But sometimes, even though I'm in the county, there's restrictions that run with the deed on my property. And so I have some kind of deed restriction that tells me you can't run a business, or maybe if I wanted to build, a second larger, maybe a guest house, it may say you can only have one residence, per per plot or whatever. So whoever originally broke it up placed restrictions on it.
Okay.
But there's other things that can prohibit you from doing what you want to do on your property.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then let's talk about
HOA.
your next box would be, yeah, if it's got an HOA or POA, property owners, or any of that good stuff, whether or not it is. And title companies can verify this stuff for you too if you guys aren't sure. And a lot of times agents just go and look at past listings and like, well, they said they didn't have one. Doesn't mean that they don't have one.
Right.
You know, it's filed the property basically, and I forget the year. It's somewhere in the 70s is when associations became a thing in Texas. And so if you have a home that's built in the 60s, there's no way they didn't exist. They'd have to add one later on.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean? And most people don't voluntarily set up an HOA for their properties.
Okay. And usually, like, when I'm looking at it in the MLS, they usually say, like, this much is the HOA fee monthly. And so if it has that, then you can check yes.
Yep.
Okay.
That's right.
Makes sense.
Just assume as much. Most of the newer master plan communities have them. And that by checking that box is going to trigger another form, which is the association addendum.
Oh, okay.
So you go through that too. You can read all this good stuff that's here. Unless you had questions about any specific item on these target things, but if you want to kind of read them, they're pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah. Okay.
Property condition.
Is a seller's disclosure notice?
Seller's disclosure. So make sure you got one. Like I said, most good listing agents will have it already on the MLS for you. It'll be there. But if it's not, you have to give them a time frame to get it. You want to get that disclosure during your option period and early in your option period. I usually want it in a day or two. There's no reason they should have already done it. Why didn't they do it before they put it on the MLS?
Okay. So
but you do get sometimes you have you have sellers that can be, let's just call them difficult sometimes, and they don't want to fill it out, right? But here we can give them a hard timeline, usually a couple days, but it definitely needs to be in your option period, right?
So, okay, so if your effective date is like today and your option period is 5 days, you want to get it like before?
I like to, because it's just cleaner. I mean, it has it built in here. So yeah, like it says, if seller delivers notice, well, let's read the whole thing. If buyer does not receive notice, buyer may terminate this contract at any time prior to closing and the earnest money be refunded to the buyer. If seller delivers the notice, buyer may terminate this contract for any reason. So yeah, for any reason within 7 days after receiving the notice or prior to closing, whichever occurs first, and the earnest money will be refunded. So let's say, you put a longer date. Maybe you got this closer to the end of your option period. Your option period ended, but you found something else in the disclosure. It said something like they had a previous termite treatment that scared you, or foundation work that was done, or something that y'all didn't know before. It is another out in the contract for your buyer.
Gotcha.
It's always so clean, man. Just breaking up during the option period is the cleanest thing you can do in a contract.
Of course.
My advice. If we're gonna part ways, let's do it during that option period.
Yeah.
But it is an out. All right. Sorry, let me
Flood-based paint.
a couple texts here, make sure. Put that on silent. Okay, where are we at?
So,
so the seller's not required. You will have, so on that, sorry, that 3. This is a 1-to-4 contract. On a duplex, any multi-unit, I think there's only 3 exceptions for not having to provide a disclosure. One is a multi-family unit, like a duplex or larger or more units. The second is a death, like if this is an estate sale, like an executor or whatever. And the third one is foreclosure. And so if the house has been foreclosed on, and that can't be like short sale is not a foreclosure yet. A foreclosure is when a bank takes a house back, or you are the bank, you do owner finance and you foreclose on somebody, right? That's the only 3 exceptions. So you always, and I even try to get them on multifamilies. Like disclosure is just, every lawsuit I've ever been in has been over disclosure, and we've been in a handful.
Gotcha.
So
So you want to have it for the most
You
part.
want to have it, man. You can squeeze it out of them, but I'm just saying those three that excludes the seller from getting out.
Gotcha.
And so a lot of people don't understand. So like this buyer accepts the property in as is condition. That doesn't mean, so if you check that first box, that doesn't mean you're not going to go and renegotiate for repairs. You're still going to likely do that during your option period. That just means like the second option, you can say, right now I can see I'm in this house and that window is foggy, it's broken, it's busted. I want to change the panes out. And I would write that right there, third bedroom window from the wet, third most western window in the master bedroom is foggy and needs to be replaced.
And that's something you maybe just you could just see when you
would just see it. Yeah, you're walking through the house and you're like, oh man, the ceiling fan's coming off the hinges, or garage door is, the opener doesn't work. Click on it, doesn't work. You could put that right here in item 2 for them to repair for you, and agree before you even do your inspections. It even tells you, I didn't even know this. I was reading, do not insert general phrases such as subject to inspections that do not identify specific repairs and treatments. You want to this is what I want you to do, because during your inspection period, you are going to find stuff, and depending on the negotiation, how hard you want to push for them.
For sure.
I'll let you read through those. You can hit me up if you have questions. Let's talk about filling in the blanks.
Yeah. And then we can talk about this later too, but when you are getting your inspection and you're negotiating for repairs, how do you normally price those out?
Depends on what it is. Some things you want to get a bid. If it looks like it's something pretty severe, you want to get a bid for it. Some things are minor, and you may just call around or have your buyer, call around for. The bigs are structural and HVAC typically, right? Those are usually the bigs that you're going to need to get pricing.
Okay.
And not to tell you, I'd encourage you to price everything out if you can.
And you can do that within the option period.
You can do that within the option period, but if you have a laundry list, and I'll tell you there's a difference, right? So a first-time home buyer, somebody who's not bought a home, they haven't had the joys of fixing all the crap that breaks in your house, is going to be super nervous. They're going to see that inspection report, and those inspectors they're trained to find everything, and it can be terrifying for a first-time home buyer. And so it's really good to have the inspector walk with them and say, because inspectors looked at, typically by the time they get their master, whatever that is, responsible license, they looked at hundreds and hundreds of houses, and they can tell you this is typical, but it's going to look scary on paper when they say the property has a corner pop, which is like a little crack in the foundation on the corner of the house, because usually there's a trowel layer of, they trowel over some light concrete or I don't know if it's mortar or whatever, and just the way most houses settle, it pops off and it cracks and it looks like the foundation's cracking in the corner. But every house that's 5, 6, 7 years in Texas here has them.
That's it. Okay.
Right? But it looks scary to a buyer, oh my God. So it's really important whenever you have your inspection, after, usually it takes them, a couple hours, 2-3 hours, and ask them hey, can we walk the house with you and give us just kind of a quick summary before we get the report? And almost any decent inspectors will say, of course. And so they'll show you, hey, I don't like, if this were my house, I would look at this area of the roof, looks like there was water penetration here. It might only be when there's high winds, but they're not installed. The shingles aren't installed correctly. Something to that effect, or hey, the AC was really close to, I think it's supposed to be a 20-degree variance between the intake and the out, in and out. But this one's, it's not quite, it's, not quite doing what it's supposed to be doing. So you may want to have that serviced or looked at,
And that way they can, the inspector can explain that, because
Yeah.
I've had buyers ask me to explain it, and I'm just
well, that's it. You're not doing all that, and and the more you do, the more experience you'll see the same things over and over and over.
Right.
You're looking at an older house. They, air conditioners, they didn't put a kill switch in them that turns them off. If the water thing gets full, then it turns off the AC.
Gotcha.
Older systems don't have that, and they're slowly getting phased out as they get replaced. But a lot of them don't have that. A lot of them for the gas lines. They have this little gas, there's supposed to catch any like solids that come through the gas line. So it's just like kind of a gas trap they have. It's usually on water heater, or could be on your furnace. And you'll see that comes up all the time. But you'll notice it's a trend as you sell more homes. It's the same things. And for a first-time home buyer, you kind of have to explain to them, like, look, these aren't really that big of a deal. When you replace whatever it is, that's usually when you want to go in and you'll do it to code.
Okay,
but
that makes sense.
All right, sorry about that tangent.
No, you're good. Super helpful.
Useful info. Residential service contracts that's a home warranty.
Home warranty, yep.
That's what that is. And so what you want to do is find your favorite one, whatever company you like to work with. Look at their pricing, look at their reviews. That's what you tell your buyers. They can pick whatever they want. There's tons of them that are out there. They range anywhere from, $400-ish on the super cheap. That's kind of like your basic, probably just about do nothing warranty, all the way up to, $500-600. And that kind of gets your everything covered. Some of them will even, if you have an irrigation system on the house, you can add the irrigation or pool equipment, that kind of stuff.
Okay. Yeah, and I remember the sale that I did, we put like 500 and they came back and said they found one for 400, and that was their like counter. So,
yeah.
Okay.
No, and there are ones out there, but you're most of the time you get what you pay for,
Yeah. And this is just saying that the seller is gonna pay the buyer for the first like year of it, or like reimburse them for.
Yeah. So they're buying. It says, let's read buyer may. I haven't read it in a while. I know it buys a home warranty. You may purchase a residential service contract from residential service company licensed by TREC. If the buyer purchases, the contract seller shall reimburse the buyer at closing for the cost of the contract in an amount not to exceed. So let's say you put $600 there. If you spent 500, the 100 it just didn't. It goes back to like this. Then go back to the seller. The seller just doesn't spend the money.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's kind of where. Yeah, and usually they're usually at least a year. Some of them are like 13-month contracts.
Gotcha.
Right.
Sounds good. Okay. So closing. I guess here, I guess if you could just kind of tell me like a good average for cash and then for with third-party financing.
So cash is when your guys are ready, and your title company can crank out a commitment and be ready to close. If they're going to buy title insurance, like cash is, you have to talk to your title company. That's how busy are you? Can y'all do a closing in a week? They may say no, we need 2 weeks. Just to be how busy they are.
Okay.
With financing, again, that's a conversation with the lender. Before you get this, you've already talked to the lender, and hey, look, we're looking at this property. You get your pre-approval letter, for the property, and say, hey, what's realistic to close this loan? How much time do you realistically need? Because what you don't want to do, the worst is when you undershoot these closings, you try to make your offer look better, right? Oh, we can close in 3 weeks or 3.5 weeks, and you've got an FHA loan, which takes a little longer. Usually, it's a little more paperwork. They're like a 30 to 45 day close.
Okay.
And so it's really just talking to that lender and seeing, the strength of the buyer and the strength of the lender, really too. How backed up are they, to get it closed?
I bet now they're pretty backed up.
Yeah, it is. They're rocking and rolling. But just
Okay,
30,
so like I could put like maybe
it's usually a 30 to 45 day, somewhere in that range. Now keep in mind, when you're negotiating, that you might negotiate this deal for 3 or 4 days. So if you put 30 days, well, now you got 26 days. Your lender hadn't even seen this yet.
so this is from the executed.
That's from the executed date. That's correct.
Executed date. Okay.
Well, yes, that's right. That's when you're gonna want to do it. It's gonna make you put a hard date in that case, but yeah.
Right. That makes sense. Okay.
Cool. Possession. That's pretty straightforward. You either, whenever you close it out, right, like if nobody's living there, there's no other lease. Sometimes the seller will do a lease back, or they want a lease back as part of their deal, so they can stay and pack up all their stuff and move into their new house a little easier. Sometimes it's a vacant house. Sometimes they're out of there. It just depends on your situation for those two. I'm okay with seller lease backs for the most part. What I don't like is a buyer leasing a house before. There is a temporary lease form for that also, and I am not a huge fan. That usually if something goes wrong, buyer can't buy the house. Now they don't want to get out. They're upset. Or they get in the house and they start picking it apart.
Yeah.
Or even making it worse, like they're like, oh, this is broken. Like, no, that wasn't broken. And oh, this is broken. And then that wasn't broken either. And it just causes a fight between buyer and seller, and just can be, in my experience, very messy. Stay away from
it's messy.
buyer leases. Yep.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's like, lease back. I guess, have you ever put really anything in the special
You
provision?
really don't. You try to stay away from special provisions, but this is where I may put something. The only thing I'd put in here would be, like it says, factual statements. So I'd say, something maybe along the lines of like, the buyer is buyer agent's mother, or like some like a familial relationship. Seller is listing agent's cousin. I don't know. Like I think you only have to do like 1 degree of it, but I just disclose everything.
Yeah, makes sense.
It's been that's what I've had my experience has been, but that's for the most part, that's what you'll put in there. There may be some other really random rare stuff, but that's you don't really, you try not to put things in there if you can avoid it, because we have a lot of forms for things.
Okay, is this
settlement
seller helping with closing costs?
It is. And so again, keep in mind, this is a number you probably want to get from the lender, right? How much can they get? How much should they get? Because you don't want to get too much money. If you read here, it says, amount not to exceed, and then whatever number. And so that means, let's say if you put $10,000 in there and they only use $6,000, well, the seller doesn't have to give you the money back. The seller only puts up $6,000. So that $4,000 in essence just kind of went by the wayside. It hurt the buyer. It's great for the seller, bad for the buyer. Depends on what side of the transaction you're on, right?
Okay.
But in this case, if the buyer wouldn't have been able to use all that money if you put a number there that's too big. So you want to make sure that's reasonable when you talk to the lender. If at all, it depends on the type of loan. Typically, I'll tell you, like, it's a lot of times first-time home buyers or people that don't have a lot of cash coming into the deal. Maybe they're doing an FHA loan or something. That's when you usually see dollars, right?
Okay. And if a buyer does want to negotiate, so like say for example, their estimated closing costs from their lender is like $10,000, and they do want the seller to help them with that, what is kind of a reasonable ask?
Well, there's a few different factors, right? So if they put a big number there and y'all are already close on appraisal, because this pushes the price up, right? So let's use for grins, let's use a $100,000 house.
Okay.
For easy numbers. We have this 100, which doesn't exist in Austin.
Not at all.
But you have a $100,000 house, and your lender tells you can get an extra $3,000. It's 3% of the deal. I don't forget. It's between 3 and 6 normally, I think, is what they allow. But let's say all you really need is the $3,000. Well, you guys go to get the house, and you think it's worth right at $100,000. When that's what you've done comps on the house. You think it's worth right at $100,000. That extra $3,000 might push it outside of the appraisal, right? And so that's where you have to be kind of careful with this too. So you've got one, you don't want to ask for. You want to find out what the lender says. You don't want to ask for too much money, because then it goes wasted if you don't use it all. Mm-hmm. But then also you have to be careful that it's not going to push a property above the appraised amount. So a seller looks at this money as added to the sales price.
Right.
That $100,000 house, if y'all are negotiating and the seller wants 100, you want this 3,000, they're going to want you to pay 103 for the house.
Gotcha.
That's your sticker price on the top is going to be 103 to get this money out of the seller. And then the property appraises and it comes in at 100,000. Well, crap, now what do we do? Right? You have this $3,000 and they're going to want to take it off right here. Ooh, take it off. So you want to make sure all of those things have to line up, because what you don't want to do is and you get buyers that are really excited, like, no, I think it could, and maybe it will. But if the appraisal's tight, this is where you really have to be careful, because the buyer's going to spend a lot of money on inspections. They're going to spend all this cash, and only to find out the property didn't appraise. And if they don't have all the cash, they needed this extra money. Right now it's all for naught. Now you cancel the deal, you unroll the whole thing, and now they're out, several hundred, if not, $1,000 plus,
Okay.
from all the crap they had to do to get here.
And when is an appraisal required?
An appraisal is ordered by the lender, and so that's where you have to stay on top of the lender to get it.
Okay.
And you want it as soon as you're done, like as soon as you're out of option, they're serious, because the buyer does have to pay for them. In most cases, the buyer pays for their appraisal. But as soon as you're through that inspection period, or y'all are agreed on repairs, whatever the case, that repairs aren't going to hold you up.
Mm-hmm.
You want to get that appraisal ordered, and that's just you pestering the lender. Hey, did you order the appraisal yet? You call them later that day, or the next day. Hey, just checking on that appraisal.
Yeah.
Because that's the second biggest deal killer in today's market, anyways.
Gotcha. Okay, sounds good. All right, so this is just their addresses.
Actually, in here, I don't only put my information for the notices to the buyer.
Oh.
I put all my info. I don't like it's me being old school, but I don't like anybody else having that information. If the title company needs it, and the title company will need their email and all that stuff, I give that to them privately.
Directly, okay.
Mm-hmm. But this has my phone number, my email, has all my info on it.
Okay. So then this is just like usually going to be third-party financing.
Third party. So then seller financing is pretty what that is. There's the addendum, property subject to mandatory membership in the property owners association. That's an HOA addendum.
Right.
Never can remember that whole big old long thing. A buyer's temporary residential lease. Remember, never use that.
Yeah, we don't like that.
Loan assumption, I've never used. Addendum for sale of other property by buyer. That's a contingency sale. So that's if you had another property to sell. And I actually have another training video on our website about that too. So contingency.
So it's contingent upon the buyer selling their house.
That's right. That's when you'd use that.
Okay.
Addendum for a reservation of oil, gas, and other minerals. I think I have a video about that too. That in Texas we have surface rights and you have mineral rights.
Okay. So
it's usually on acreage property, which a lot of times those are done on farm and ranch contracts. But you will on occasion run into that. And so that addendum is for the seller reserving some portion of mineral rights.
Okay.
It's not in favor of the buyer. If nothing is said here, the buyer in theory would get the mineral rights unless they've already been sold, which you don't know. There's no guarantee that when you buy a house, it comes with all the mineral rights. That's a whole nother animal. You have to hire somebody to look and research that. So
gotcha.
So if you're just buying a regular house, don't get too excited about buying it for oil underneath it.
Right.
Right. Those are probably sold, and especially in a master plan community. Those are long gone.
Yeah.
All right. And then addendum for backup contract. That's if, you want to be next in line, multiple offer, they loved it. You want to be next in line for it. That's most commonly when that's used, but it's also used in another weird, which I explained in the contingency sale. Yeah, we'll get into that on another deal. I can spend more time on that. Then for coastal area property, we don't have a whole lot here in Central Texas. For authorizing hydrostatic testing, I'm not, it depends on how old the house is. I've got mixed emotions about hydrostatic testing. And I guess we can cross that bridge if you come to that. A right to do to a lender's appraisal. That's a good one for multiple offers, that form. So if you get if you're in a house that's really hot, it can make you more competitive based on how much your buyer is willing to pay. It can also ensure that your buyer can get out of a contract. If the property doesn't appraise, some lenders will still push for, but it's most commonly used for multiple offers. Let's leave it at that.
Okay.
Threatened species, you'll know that should be already disclosed on the listing. There's a seller's temporary lease. Sometimes that comes up if the property's occupied. It's not too uncommon. Short sales are not currently that big of a thing, but as the economy weakens, you'll see more of that. Property located in seaward I've never done that. Like, then the lead-based paint addendum, you will use on properties 1978 and older. Have that on every single one. A property and propane gas service area. That's on like when a builder built the subdivision and they wouldn't bring natural gas out for them. A lot of times these builders will build their own propane thing in the front of the neighborhood to service the whole neighborhood. But you're buying the propane from, and that's kind of a good racket, right? And then the only other thing they don't talk about on here is a non-realty item addendum.
Oh yeah, you told me about that the other day.
Yeah.
That's like if any appliances convey.
That's right. You want to make sure you call them out too, dude. I mean, if it's a silver Samsung refrigerator, you put silver Samsung refrigerator in the kitchen. Don't put fridge. They're like, oh, you can have the crappy beer fridge in the garage. That's you know what I mean? You want to?
Yeah. I pulled it up. Yeah, this one. So it's like, yeah, it said like model number, serial number.
That's right. That's right. It's as much as you can put about it. That's right.
Okay. Cool.
Be specific.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, option period. This is important.
All right. Option period. This starts the day after. I think I did another little video on this one too, but really it starts the day after the executed date, the effective date, right, of the contract. So you say you have a 7-day option and you go under contract on the 2nd of the month. The 3rd is day 1. That's when you start counting.
So the day after it's like signed and executed.
Day 1. That's right.
Is day 1.
That's right. Also, it's imperative that you get this option money receipted. This is another one. If you don't get it receipted in 3 days, you don't have an option.
Gotcha.
And a lot of people forget, like, it's not a title company that signs that receipt. Most of the time it's a seller or the listing agent or even the listing broker.
Okay.
You can go over to their office and say, hey, can you please sign this? But don't, if you miss it, you're out. I mean, I have agents, it's happened on both sides. On our side, agents miss it and you don't have an option period and the buyer wants to cancel. And so the buyer agent ends up paying that because they won't refund the earnest money. And so the buyer agent ends up paying that earnest money to keep their clients happy.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah.
Ouch.
And I normally do the will be credited, that box, like, and most stuff.
Yeah.
I would say on 99 out of 100 times, that's the answer there.
So again,
it is a negotiable item, but
okay. And so just like, sticking with just like pretty typical, like maybe 5 to 7 day option period.
It depends on the factors, right? So do you have a long holiday weekend coming up where you're not gonna be able to get an inspector? Are the buyer, people who's out of town? Anything that might some kind of hindrance to you getting into that property and getting the inspection done. That's what would extend it. You want to make sure you have a good excuse. The seller wants those days as short as possible.
Of course.
They want you in and out. Make up your mind if you want it. So just keep those things in mind. Yes, it's very typical. I would say between 5 and 10 days is probably is most common. And if you're in a multiple offer situation, if you get multiple offers on a property, or it's going to be a super hot one going into it, already have your inspector called and be like, hey, we're about to put an offer today. You be in, and can you do an inspection in like 3 days, 2 days? How soon?
Gotcha.
Lined up before you even go in. That's just good business.
Okay. And then usually maybe like $100 to $200.
I mean, it's kind of, as a rule of thumb, is kind of like 10% of what the earnest money is. It's just like a basic rule of thumb. Again, there's no set amount, but let's say again on our $100,000 house, I'd probably have $1,000 in earnest money and $100 in option money.
Okay.
On a $200,000 house, I'd probably pay a couple $100. I would offer probably a couple $100. It costs them a little more to keep it off of the market.
Sure.
And they might want more. So you're like, well, we need 2 weeks because grandma wants to come see the house too during the option period, whatever it is. We need 2 weeks, and they're going to charge you for that. You're probably going to pay for that. Instead of paying $250, they might want $500.
Gotcha.
And that money goes away. It's gone. The seller can go have a steak dinner that night with that money.
Okay.
Now you get it back at closing if you'd close, but
So if you close, you get it'll be credited. That's like what this box is.
Yep.
And if you back out, you lose the option money, but you get the earnest money.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so the buyer wants that money as low as, so this is another one, right? The buyers wants that as low as possible, and the seller wants it as high as possible.
Of course. Okay. Perfect. Attorneys.
That's rare that you'll use that, but if for whatever reason people who have their attorneys, you can fill it out. That date is not filled out until that is a fully signed off on, right? I mean, executed, fully executed contract. Then that date goes in there. So if it's done at midnight, like you get it. And so the ideal situation for you as the buyer, you're trying to push it, you're trying to stretch it so you can get more time on your op. It's worse to get an executed contract at like 11 o'clock at night. Like then the next day starts your option. It's great if y'all were really close that night and then, well, we signed it that morning at 9 a.m. And now you have a full day to try to get all your, start getting your stuff together.
So if you sign it and execute it like the morning of, you kind of finessed like an extra day in your option.
That's right. In essence, you did, yeah.
Okay. And then is it the buyer's agent who fills this out?
It's supposed to be, so it says broker fill in the date of final acceptance. It's supposed to be, and it's done by the agent. There's a lot of things that say broker, which you act as my agent, you can do it. But it's not necessarily just the buyer's agent. It may be, let's say y'all went back and forth. You sign this and we're like, okay. And then they send over and they're like, oh, but we want to use Susie with this title company. We're like, okay. And then y'all sign off on that. And you're like, oh, but you know what? We did want you to repair those blinds in the master bedroom. And you kick it back. And they're the last one that signs off. They're the ones that put that executed.
Okay, so the last signer.
Last signer's agent, broker, either one.
Okay.
And this is really nice when you're a buyer's agent if you fill out all their information for them. Put all yours here, but you also do it for the listing agent. I just find that really nice when I'm listing a property and somebody's like, oh, I'm like, man, they really thought this through.
It's an act of kindness.
Yeah, it is. It's really good. It's nice. And so it says here, listing brokers agree to pay other broker whatever they have on the MLS. That's what it pays. You can put whatever you want there, but whatever is advertised on the MLS system is the commission. Now, if you were to say you're demanding you want more, let's say they're advertising 2 and you want 2.5 or 3 or whatever, that's where you would use something in the special provisions. Let's say, seller agrees to pay buyer's agent commission of 3%. It would need to be spelled out in the contract. This last 2 pages we're looking at, if you look at the top of it, scroll to the top of the page. So it says, not on this one, broker information. So it says print names only, do not sign. This is not part of the contract. It's an informational page.
Okay.
That's all it is. So by you putting 4% there, like, some agents like, oh, I'm gonna get sneaky, I'm gonna put a bigger commission for myself. Doesn't mean anything.
Okay.
What's advertised for the property or what's agreed to in the main body of the contract, if it's different than what's advertised.
Okay, and what does it mean? I've seen some on the MLS that's like 3% agent commission and then like 2% sub agent. You
won't do a sub agent. At Central Metro, we don't allow sub agency. Okay. That's basically where you're both working for the same team.
Oh, okay.
You're both working for the seller. Yeah, and 99.9% of the time, but we don't allow that. Most firms don't allow that. When you see that on there, it's because maybe they just hadn't been trained or told. But like that's not a sub agency shouldn't exist. And the other thing is that an intermediary where you were the only agent involved, like you're like, oh, I can work both sides. That's not allowed with us either. Okay. You have to choose a side. Now, if you already have the listing, that's who you work for. You can show them the right paperwork, like here it is, but you can't fill it out for them. You can't help them fill it out, but you could give them a 1-to-4 contract. You could give them the things for them to make an offer on the property.
Would that be a situation like maybe like if somebody's like the listing agent and then they got a lead from like Zillow and they weren't working with a buyer's agent?
That's right. Or somebody walks in, open house. They're like, we love it. We want to put an offer today, right now. Okay. Then we have a form. I have a form with Central Metro that says, we don't work for you. We just work for the seller. That's who we say.
And they just have to do everything themselves.
That's right.
Okay. Sounds good. So this is filled out by whoever receives the option
fee. It. All your receipts. So usually the top one is, like it says, there's seller or listing broker. The top one's not supposed to be done by the title company. It's supposed to be by seller or listing broker. At the earnest and contract receipt, that's the title company.
Okay. So this is title company as well. Escrow agent, escrow agent.
And that's it, man. We made it.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. And then yeah, I just attached the third-party financing as well. If you still have time, if not, we can always go through this another time.
I'm looking at my phone again. I put it on silent. Make sure I'm not getting too many pings. Got a handful. Let's see who. Okay, so third-party financing. Anytime you got a loan, this guy's tacked on. It's pretty, depending on your type of loan, conventional. That's somebody's putting usually. I think there's 5% programs now. 5% down, 10%, 20%. So that first box is checked, first mortgage and then principal amount of that dollar amount is exactly what matches on the contract under financing.
Okay.
That's typically, unless a first and a second loan, which is that's very rare anymore. Prior to 2008, more you saw that.
Usually 30 years.
30 years.
And then
this interest not to exceed. That's a lender question. However much, or they quoted me at whatever 3.5.
Is usually this going to be on like their loan estimate?
It may be, yeah. It may be from, yeah.
Okay.
But like that amount doesn't lock them into that interest rate. It just means if it goes any higher than that, it's an out for you guys.
Oh, okay.
Right. And then so the next underneath that per annum for the first 30 years, typically, unless it's an adjustable rate. Mm-hmm. The loan with origination charges is shown on the loan estimate. The loan not to exceed, and I usually put 1%.
Okay.
Sorry, they let the big dog in the house. He started barking.
Oh, all good. Don't worry.
And it's really rare with second mortgages. Like I said, after 2008, they completely dried up. But they're a lot more rare. Sometimes you will have like an 80-10-10 loan. So you 80% first, 10% second, 10% down payment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
That's like just pretty standard conventional financing.
Yep, that's it.
Okay. And then yeah, like if I ever do come into contact with the veteran or FHA loan, then I can I got
FHA. Yep.
I feel like that's going to be, for the most part, what we're going to be using.
That's it.
Okay.
And then approval of financing. So you want this contract is subject to, so you want to definitely go and check that box. And then so this is, again, the buyer wants more time and the seller wants less time. This usually ranges somewhere between 14 and 21 days.
Okay.
Typically. Now that's all negotiable. So they may say, nah, we're only going to give you should have already been pre-approved. We're only going to give you 10 days. Or maybe sometimes you can put it out that look, the property's been on the market for a minute, or for whatever reason, you swing for the fences and go for a 30-day approval time. Yeah. This is an out for the buyer, right?
So if the buyer isn't approved for financing, they can back out even though they're not in the option period.
That's right.
Okay.
Now, it's always a negotiation with the earnest money, but in theory, they're supposed to give their earnest money back. If it was something, for whatever reason, they can't, maybe they lost their job, they can't get financing anymore, or they, whatever, something happened. It was a credit blip that they didn't see before.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and it says earnest money will be refunded to buyer. Okay.
And then the next underneath that, so that's where you say the other boxes, this contract is not subject to buyer approval, which that's pretty rare. But if you're in a multiple offer and you got somebody's putting $100,000 cash down and they really want to get this house, maybe. But I don't know. That's just, again, to make you more competitive. And then right under that, it talks about property approval. This is just to show you that's where it talks about appraisal in there. It doesn't satisfy lender's requirements. It says including somewhere in there. I lost my train here, but it talks about appraisal. If the property doesn't appraise, then the lender won't do the loan. Then that's a way to get out. Now that doesn't mean, let's say if the property doesn't appraise for as much money as the buyer would want it to, they can get out. As long as the lender will still do the loan, they're stuck in they're in the contract. But if the buyer says, hey, I won't do this loan because of the appraised amount, then that's an out. Right? If you want to, the buyer wants, what's that?
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, if the buyer wants a specific appraised amount, that's that appraisal addendum I talked about earlier. There's a special addendum for that that says, basically, if it doesn't reach this number, we're out.
Okay. And can the buyer opt out of getting an appraisal, or is that required?
No, for a loan, if you have a loan, you're getting an appraisal. That's required by the law.
Okay. Yeah, I think the one deal that I did was cash, which is why I'm like, okay, I don't know if I've come in contact with an appraisal.
Cash, you can do whatever you want. You can just go in and I'll give you cash and you give me the deed. I'll see you later. We don't need
which is why I kind of wanted to go through this, because I felt like I just had a really easy deal because it was all cash.
Yeah, cash is nice. Awesome. All right, and the rest is talks about FHA and all that. That's it.
Awesome. That is super helpful. I'm just trying to think. Okay, yeah. The condo, I have one that that was my one deal that I did, but I feel like they're pretty similar.
Very, very similar. It's just there's not going to be a survey, and it's going to add in the HOA information is going to be built into to the contract, but everything else is going to be very, very similar.
Okay.
Because and then this non-realty,
they
don't want to see a big dollar amount in here. A lender doesn't want to see. So if you go to the top, so it has for an additional sum of X. Lenders like to see 0. There. If you're going to buy other stuff, like let's say they have a really nice hot tub, but it's a portable. It's not built into the ground, and your clients want to buy the hot tub from them. You probably want to do it outside of the deal, because a lot of times the lenders don't like seeing. I'm going to pay, for an additional whatever. Or no, the other way around. Sorry, flip that. The lenders want to see that you're going to pay, but they might. What am I trying to say here? What I'm trying to say is, lenders don't like to finance. At the end of the day, they don't like to finance your stuff.
Right.
So if, like for example, if you're getting we're getting a hot tub and the tractor. Right, and it says $0, and that's probably means it's included in the sales price of the home. So they'd want to see you paying something there for it, and the lender may require that you to show up with that extra $5,000, whatever whatever this number is. Right, you just have to be. It's just be cautious. Think of it like a lender. I don't know how really to deliver what I'm trying to say to you, but you know what I mean. Like they don't want to see you basically getting. They don't want to be financing a bunch of crap.
Yeah.
It's typical to see a fridge and a washer and dryer, maybe like a security system, stuff like that. Is really typical. But when you start throwing in toys, like, oh, we want the 4-wheeler and the, whatever, then that starts raising some flags.
Then you want to put that, like, you're going to be paying for that.
That's right. And so if that comes, before I'd even get to that point, this is the reason I bring all this up, is before I even get to that point, I would talk to the lender and say, hey, they really want that, there's a, whatever, a tractor. It's just common, like somebody has some yard implement, something you're going to use on the property, that they want to trade. How do you want us to treat that? And the lender may tell you, outside of closing, that's how you're going to treat that. Don't even put it on this contract. Do something else with it.
Okay, that makes sense. And then for like the typical things that a lot of on the MLS, like it says like washer, dryer, like refrigerator, all convey, you would put that here for just like 0.
That's right. Okay. And that's typical. Most lenders don't raise a stink about like water, most water softeners are hardwired in, but things that you have in a normal house. I'm saying it's when you start adding up toys.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.